And welcome to lecture number 31, Intro to Europe. Europe, we're going to spend a little bit of time with because Europe is really what is the source of our heritage here in the United States. For the most part, our heritage, our beliefs come from Europe. So we're going to spend a little bit of time with that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Europe and talk about the development of democracy, which partially happens in Europe. We can talk about religious conflict, which consumes Europe for a couple centuries. We're going to talk about the Cold War. We're going to take a look at the European Union. All of these very important parts of Europe and important to us. So let's take a look at the development of democracy first. Okay, democracy has not always been around. In fact, democracy is a very recent form of government, is a very rare thing. Of course, we all know the Greeks kind of experimented with it. They dinked around with it in their tiny little city-states. Yeah, it was a democracy of a sort. However, democracy for a large country, this develops in Britain. Okay, most historians would say 1215, the signing of the Magna Carta is really the first baby step towards democracy. So what was the Magna Carta? A bunch of the noblemen in England got bugged at the king, King John. He was always getting carried away and asking for more money than they really wanted to give him and those sorts of things. So there was a little bit of a revolution, and they basically made him sign a document limiting his powers. Now, it was not like we're going to have a democracy, not like we're going to have votes, not like we're going to have polling stations, none of that stuff. All it did was establish that the law is superior to the king. And that was a baby step. Oh, yeah, that's a real baby step. Well, 1295 is another little baby step. The nobles kind of get together and they form a group called the Parliament. And the king gives it this name in 1295, calls the Parliament, kind of empowers this group of people. And this is a group of people that, again, limits the king and what he can do. Historians would say that the Habeas Corpus Act, yeah, you may have heard habeas corpus. Let's see, that was, what was it, 1679. Basically, the Habeas Corpus Act says the king can't just throw people in jail without a reason. Again, limiting the powers of the king. So these little baby steps. But where does democracy really develop? Develops in the United States before it was the United States. It develops in the colonies. So we have all these Englishmen come to America with these ideas that, you know, they're going to kind of have to run themselves. And in fact, for a century, Americans run themselves. It's called the era of benign neglect in the history books. The king just can't be bothered with these colonies. And so they run themselves and they develop democracy. They develop legislative bodies. They have the vote. Now, yeah, vote's not for everybody. It's not for women. It's not for black people. It's not for poor people. But this is where democracy really develops because it basically has to develop here. And then we have, of course, the Revolutionary War, and we set up a democracy here in the United States. Democracy, this is the first large-scale experiment with democracy in the history of the world. Okay, so then this drive for democracy bounces back to Europe in the form of the French Revolution. 1789, no, it was July 14th, 1789, the French storm the Bastille and they declare a republic, and it immediately begins to go downhill. The French have no experience with democracy. In America, we've had 100 years of experience with democracy before the Revolutionary War. French, no. All they've known is monarchy. All they've known is a strong man in charge. So we have the French Revolution, and the radicals take over. They disillusion the people. Eventually, Napoleon takes over. Napoleon conquers half the, well, more than half of Europe before he is finally crushed and a king put back into running France. Well, this basically begins the 1800s, where you have a constant conflict throughout Europe between democracy and monarchy. It goes on for 100 years before they finally democracy wins out. Most people think of the American Civil War as a trial of democracy. All the crowned heads of Europe, oh man, they were loving this Civil War. They thought, oh good, Civil War, those Americans and their stupid little democracy experiment, they're going to crush themselves, and we won't have to worry about it here in Europe. Well, eventually, yeah, they do have to worry about it in Europe, and democracy basically then becomes what we have in Europe too. So that's democracy. It's spreading worldwide now. What about religious conflict? Second thing I wanted to just chat with you a minute about. Again, we have a very authoritarian church. After the Renaissance, we have, or after the Dark Ages, well, during the Dark Ages, we have the Roman Catholic Church is basically in charge of Europe as far as religion goes. That's not till, what was it, Halloween night, probably during a day, 1517, Martin Luther, who is discouraged at what he sees as corruption in the Catholic Church, nails his 95 theses on the door of the Wittenberg Chapel. This is kind of the event that sparks what's called the Reformation, where we begin to have Protestantism in the north and largely Catholicism in the south, and they battle with each other for over 100 years. And finally, the Roman Catholic Church loses a certain amount of dictatorial power. You can think of it kind of in the line of a democratization in the religious world. Okay? Well, what's the next big challenge to democracy and freedom in Europe? Well, we have a brief trial with Hitler and Nazism. That doesn't last very long. Something that lasts much longer is the response to this, and that is the Cold War. We have Russia, which has conquered lots of little areas around it. They form the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. And they are victorious in World War II. They grab Poland, they grab Czechoslovakia, they grab Hungary, they grab half of Germany, and set up basically an empire. And so for 50 years, more than 50 years, well, it was 1945 is when the World War ends, right up to 1981 when the Soviet Union finally collapses. We have about a half century of Cold War, where we have an aggressive communist-oriented Soviet Union threatening the Western capitalist, freedom-loving West. They had their military alliance, the Warsaw Pact. We had our military alliance, the NATO Pact, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Eventually, the Soviet Union collapses, for a number of reasons, but the main one being communism as an economic system just doesn't work. It basically falls apart under its own ineptitude, under its own corruption, under its own problems. Next thing that comes along is 1993. We have the European Union. This is generally viewed as a step forward for Europe. All of these European countries, 27 eventually, come together to form an economic, not totally political union, but an economic union that has political overtures. Okay? They used to have all have their own money. No, now they have the euro. They combine on that. They work together on certain foreign policies. All of these little countries do away with their visas and passports. Used to be you drive across Europe, every time you cross a border, you got to mess around with the border authorities, visas, passports, blah, blah, blah. No, not anymore. Now you can drive all the way across Europe without having to get hung up at the borders. You can work in any country in Europe. This is generally seen as a good thing. because after two world wars in the 1900s, they decide, you know, if we all kind of got together, we will be better off and we will not be fighting each other. And we have not had a major war in Europe since 1945. There's some problems in the Balkans, which we'll talk about later, but very minor compared to the world wars. Okay. So this is just a quick glimpse at Europe. The European heritage is what helped America to grow. And what we'll do in the next few lectures, we'll start looking at individual countries and groups of countries and see what kind of holds them together. So, hey, keep studying. See you around campus. Bye.